Hello, everyone. Welcome into another episode of Bolt Breakdowns here on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel. My name's Alex, as always. Unfortunately, the Chargers could not extend their win streak from 4 to 5 games, so they take a loss to the Baltimore Ravens, 30-23, on Monday Night Football on Harbaugh Bowl, with all the hype that went going into that. So, bit of a bummer. Obviously, not necessarily a must-win game for their playoff positioning or anything like that. But it is a game that, I would call a measuring stick type of game against an opponent that you very well could see again if the Chargers do make the playoffs. And they were not up to the task tonight, and the Ravens were simply a better team. So let's get into everything. I want to start, I guess, with the offense first. And I think we kind of do have to start with Quentin Johnston. QJ, obviously 5 targets today, 0 catches, multiple 3 or 4 drops, depending on how that ends up being graded. But yeah, this was not his best game. And I sort of thought there was a period of the season, the QJ discourse is weird because, he has put up the numbers and the touchdowns, some of that off of busted coverage. But he's done his thing. And really, prior to the Bengals game, he didn't have a drop this season. But then, has some situations in the Bengals game where, the aversion to catching through contact, I think, did cost him. And then you had one of those go routes tonight that was like that. 3rd and 6, obviously drops a pretty short route that he might have had 15 to 20 yards after to be able to run. If he catches that pass from Herbert. And then when the boos started raining down at SoFi Stadium, was back-to-back drops on 1st and 5 and 2nd and 5 on the final drive with about 2 minutes and 53 seconds left. They ended up scoring a touchdown on that drive, but too much, too little, too late for the game in general. But yeah, starting with QJ, I think that you first have to acknowledge that there has been improvement this season. I don't think that's completely made up. I do think at points the route running has looked better. I do think at points he's looked a little bit more crisp at doing what he's doing. But I do think the long-term question, particularly after this game and somewhat the Bengals game, will continue to kind of haunt the Chargers of what is the role, right? Because you can't just have a wide receiver one who is working off of shallows, hitches, and crossers, right? There's going to be times where, as we saw in this game, as we saw in the Bengals game, it just kind of has to be my guy is better than your guy, right? My guy is going to beat your guy in coverage down the field. And, on some of those go routes where QJ is sort of asked to do that himself, he's not been able to. So kind of a shame. And the mental element of it as well obviously can't be discarded because I do think that clearly to some extent it is in his head. I think he remembers what happened around this time last year, like a week ago was that Packers game, last season, I mean. And it's just sad to see it rear its ugly head again with the drops. And, Harbaugh and Herbert, to some extent, will say all the right things. Herbert defended him pretty vehemently after the press conference, talking about how he's going to keep throwing to him again. He's a fighter. And, I genuinely believe that QJ is a hard worker and has put in the work this offseason and season. But there is just such a limitation on your offense when, one of your 2 X receivers or X and Z receivers, if you want to call that, with him and Palmer have, are as limited as they are, right? Palmer, okay game from his standpoint. But, certainly not, a superimposing group on the outside. And I do think that kind of contributes to the most reliable things in their offense right now, really being McConkey and Disley, who balled out today, or balled out yesterday, I should say. But there just feels like there's this, when they go up against a team like the Ravens, and you have to compete with that offensive juggernaut that has Lamar and Derrick Henry, Andrews and Likely, and you go down Bateman, who's improved pretty greatly. When you're going up against that team, do you have the horses to run with them? And I just think on offense, the Chargers are short bodies unless they're getting, more than expected production from QJ, more than expected production from Palmer, from some source. And I just think in the last couple of weeks that has not been happening as much, as obviously defenses, have intensified down the stretch of the season. And it just kind of makes me wonder from the passing game perspective, what is the Chargers' answer this season, right? When they do get into the playoffs, because I believe in this defense when it gets healthier. We'll talk about the defensive performance today later. But if they are this limited on offense, plus, we'll hold our breath and see with the JK injury, which we'll talk about in a second. I just don't know if this QJ Palmer outside wide receiver offense is going to do enough to kind of cover up for a lot of the deficiencies that I think this team has. So in addition to, some of their own, deficiencies or non-wide receiver one capabilities as players. So sucks to see it from QJ. And I know that no one is beating himself up more than him. So I don't think at this point it's a question of whether he wants to get better, right? I think we've seen him put in the work this season, but at some point, and not so much this season, but at some point, the Chargers will be faced with the decision of what do you want to do with QJ roster-wise, right? After next year, they have to decide on his fifth-year option. And while I do think there have been moments where he has improved, I don't know if it's enough if these moments, are also going to happen in pivotal, playoff-like games. Not just the mental component with the drops, but it just felt like, QJ was a net negative on the field tonight. And when you have one of your, again, outside XZ1s being a little bit of a black hole, it makes things harder for McConkey. It makes things harder for, the whole offense to run as it should. So big QJ questions to answer after this game. Obviously, still has Herbert and Harbaugh's backing at the very least for the rest of the season, but this was a step backward. I did not want to see him take. And so it sucks that, the boos got rained down at, SoFi too, being the, I guess, being the asshole that I am. I was like, oh yeah, they're not shouting boo, they're shouting Q. But I know that's not the joke to make after last night. I'm sorry. But yeah, Dobbins, let's get to him next. He leaves before halftime and does not come back, per Laura Rutledge on the broadcast. Had a brace on his knee. I think he initially he came back out in the first half, but then did not come back out onto the field in the second half. And then the Chargers ultimately declare him out for the rest of the game. And this is a potential season swinging injury. Not saying that they are incapable of winning games with a Gus, Kimani Vidal, Hassan Haskins backfield. But JK was doing a lot for them, right? Not necessarily the sexiest from a numbers standpoint, like he was the first 2 weeks of the season, which, was kind of unsustainable production. But he was turning 2-3 yard losses into 12-yard gains. He was as we saw, in the last few games, where this run blocking has not been at the level they've wanted it to be. By no means is, Greg Roman or any of these guys kind of satisfied with where the offensive line is in that regard. And JK, was on pace for, an over 1,000 yard season, coming back from all of the injuries he's dealt with previously, the torn Achilles last year, the torn ACL in 2021, and then the complications he dealt with that in 2022. So this, there's no player that you want to almost see with an injury less than Dobbins, given his history, given how hard he has worked to be able to come back. And, you saw what the run game was without him. There was no run game. I don't even know what they ran for in the second half, but it certainly felt like a majority of those yards were in the first half, and they never really got anything off the ground, outside the garbage time, Gus Edwards score. But, they didn't have Vidal active for this game because they, choose to activate Hassan Haskins. So they don't trust Hassan Haskins outside of really pass protection and the short yardage situation. So really Gus was kind of their only back they were willing to use. And, at this stage, he has 9 carries for 11 yards in this game. I love Gus as like a secondary rotation back. We kind of saw this against the Titans where he had this like little mini resurgence. But he can't be your RB1 in 2024. I don't know what else to say about that. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have a ton of thoughts offensively other than kind of needing to get back to the drawing board. I thought McConkey and Disley, like I said, were good. Herbert, thought it was a bit of a hit or miss game for him. There were times where I felt like he was so much in the zone that he's going to hit every pass. And then, there were moments like the Palmer shot at the end of the first half, that he misses that could have potentially swung the game if that drive ends in a touchdown as opposed to a field goal. So you never know if the Chargers were able to take the lead before halftime or something like that, how that game plays out. Maybe they wouldn't have, had to play from behind quite as much in the second half. But all that aside, I thought it was an okay game. Really, the offensive line was not doing him any favors tonight. And obviously we've talked about the wide receiver room already with how limited that kind of was. Certainly are missing a couple, receiver caliber bodies. Hayden Hurst out in this game, and it's really just Disley playing out there solo at this point. Tucker Fisk got a catch. Congrats to him. But, compared to the NFL offensive juggernauts, aka the Ravens, Lions, the Eagles, whatever other teams you want to mention, my takeaway from this game is that the Chargers just don't have the horses to run with those teams. I think they can play in gritty, tough games with those teams defensively, particularly when they are healthy defensively, which they weren't tonight. But do they have the offense to get into, shootout caliber teams with the best in the AFC, the best in the NFC? If you were to see Buffalo or see any of these teams in the playoffs, right? I think my answer right now is kind of no. I don't. They don't necessarily have this high level offense against good enough teams consistently, right? They were able to beat up on the Bengals in the first half, still had some of the same second half struggles, but they were not able to move the ball much at all after that kind of opening script against the Ravens. And, that's something they're going to have to go back to the drawing board for with some of the missed opportunities in this one. I don't know how much I want to harp on this point, but offensive usage is something that struck out to me because as they have QJ going for go balls, they just haven't used DJ Chark the whole year. And I know he's off of the injury report. He's not injured. So I do kind of wonder why they're not playing him at this point. Now, the explanation I understand, right? They believe in Rager more as a blocker. They believe in him more in the special teams aspect. But at some point, you just kind of need one guy to go beat another guy. And Chark is the more prototypical X receiver than QJ is. He's had 500 yards in each of the last 2 seasons. It's just kind of a rotation piece in Carolina, in Detroit. So I still question kind of why he's not playing. I don't think Rager gives you a separation advantage over Chark, not to mention he kind of has a drop problem himself. So, when it comes to these games, I get the loyalty that Harbaugh has to some of these guys, but I do question just offensively. It's like there is a need to try something a little different, I think, in the tight end room, in the wide receiver room, and unfortunately now required in the running back room, depending on how bad the Dobbins injury is. But, back to the drawing board, I think, in terms of the player personnel usage in this game. And, I don't know. My last offensive takeaway, this is not necessarily an offensive takeaway more than just the whole team, but I do feel like this is a game that showed you that the Chargers are a year away, right? We would always get YouTube comments that are like, you guys don't believe in this team. Why don't you guys believe in this team? And the reason I was always a little hesitant, it's like, okay, but when they play a real offense, right? When they play one of these top 5 offenses, we'll see kind of how they respond, both defensively and offensively. And, to me, they didn't pass with flying colors tonight. I'll say that much. They really struggled with missed tackles defensively, some lapses in coverage, and not being able to stop Derrick Henry, right, on the defensive side of the ball. And then on offense, they just don't, again, have the horses to kind of run with some of these other teams, which is why 7-4 in a rebuild year is great. No one's going to say it's not. Absolutely, Harbaugh has, I would say, overachieved relative to my expectations, relative to mostly everyone's expectations. But when we say there is more room to go in terms of restructuring the roster, in terms of, continuing to build things out, I think games like last night are ultimately what we're talking about in terms of being able to contend with the cream of the crop. And right now, injury-wise and just player personnel-wise, from a roster standpoint before the season, they're just not at that level yet. I do want to talk about one moment in the game, and you guys can let me know your thoughts on this down in the comments below. But Harbaugh, Jim, decides to punt on 4th and 18 with about 6-ish minutes left. I didn't love the call. Now, I know it's crazy to say, okay, 4th and 18 is a go type of situation. So, I'm not saying it's a 4th and 1. I'm not saying it's easy to pick up, but you're down 2 touchdowns at that point, and your offense has not moved the ball consistently at all. I'm kind of a proponent of just taking a shot there and seeing if you can get something, if you get a defensive pass interference to be drawn there. Not to mention the time predicament too, because if you don't stop Baltimore in the requisite amount of time, you're getting the ball back 2 touchdowns. They were down 2 touchdowns with about 3 minutes left when they got the ball and were able to stop Baltimore. So I was kind of a proponent of going for it there. And, I'm not comparing the situations necessarily, but you saw John Harbaugh down 7 points in the first half. I think was he down 10 at that point? Essentially willing to go 4th and 1 from his own 16. And that changed the Ravens' fortunes dramatically, I think, on that first touchdown drive. And the Ravens on the 9 ended up, I think, 3 for 3 on Derrick Henry 4th down pickups. So I don't know. It's not something I want to necessarily complain about with Harbaugh, because do I think it would have changed the game anyway? No. Considering what I thought the result was kind of guaranteed to be at a certain point with the talent discrepancy between these teams. But I just thought it was a weird kind of conservative decision to not go for it there. Maybe it ends the game, and maybe it's a field position thing for sure. I could see the side of the coin there, but I do almost think when you get the ball back down with 3 minutes left and you're down 2 scores, I think a lot of the energy in the stadium, I think kind of the energy on the field as a whole, got a little just sucked out because the Chargers sort of decided to kind of roll over there. I'm not saying a 4th and 18 is by any means the easiest thing. But I kind of thought that was a moment where they should have gone for it and see if even if we can't complete a pass, draw a PI, something happens, and then suddenly the drive continues. I don't know. Again, I know there's people who disagree with me on that, but I just thought, compared to what Harbaugh was doing, the other Harbaugh on the other sideline was doing earlier in the game, where they're down 10, they're going 4th and 1 on their own 16. I just thought that was oddly, I thought Harbaugh coached oddly conservatively tonight. Chargers Harbaugh, that is. Let's talk about the defense. This was a bit of a weird one, because I just sort of like I talked about on offense, I just don't think they had the bodies to be able to contend, with some of this Ravens team. And I had my concerns with Mac and Denzel not, Mac potentially not being able to play in this game pregame, Denzel not playing in this game. And then Mac unfortunately came back. Him and Bosa looked, pretty off to me tonight. Credit to the interior defensive line. I think Taylor Tart and Poon Ford did a great job. They were consistently getting penetration in the backfield. They, were causing some real havoc. I thought the play where Taylor Tart almost got on Lamar Jackson too quick, and then ended up sliding. Obviously to some extent, a great play by him to get in the backfield that fast. But then he realizes, oh, I actually have a chance to sack Lamar Jackson, and then Lamar just kind of almost force moves out of the way. But yeah, I just thought, again, down linebackers, they really had Dion kind of almost as a one linebacker on the field at times. Maybe sometimes they would have Derwin moving around. I think they had Nick Neiman on maybe all four of those fourth and Henry conversions. I'd have to go back and check the tape. But again, just not the personnel that they wished that they had in those situations. And I think Cam Hart's absence was felt tonight too. Fulton looked a little bit more 2023 Fulton-y in this game, particularly on that second Ravens touchdown drive that they scored before the half. 2 pass interference penalties, and Bateman just kind of frying him on that touchdown and not getting his head around nearly, fast enough to be able to even make a play on the ball. So that was kind of a bummer. He also had a dropped interception, I think, after halftime that would have potentially changed the Chargers' fortunes quite a bit if he's able to convert that one, because I think that one was it 14-13 still at that point. But yeah, that one was obviously not a great one to give up. So secondary in this game, Alohi Gilman, I also thought was just a little off in terms of where the defense was communicating where they should be. I thought there were some of those moments in terms of tackling angles and lining up in the right spots as well. That was just a little bit unfortunate. So, tough night on defense. I don't think it's, obviously by any means the worst effort. Actually, no, I take that back. It is the worst effort. Jesse Minter puts up one of the stinkiest performances I've ever seen. And therefore, I don't think he should get a head coaching job. So, I think you use this week as evidence that, people jumped the ship there. So then we should be able to keep him for another year. But in all seriousness, I do think that the defense was just kind of outmanned tonight. I don't know if there were true solutions to some of the stuff they were doing. Obviously, just play better. But the pass rush was kind of anemic because Mac and Bosa clearly aren't themselves right now. Tuli, I think credit to him. He had a pretty good game in this one. Him and Ford combined for a couple of great tackles. Him and Taylor on I think it was Lamar Jackson sack. I'm trying to remember. But they had a good rush up to one of their wide receiver screens and were able to tackle them both at the same time. So that was good. But yeah, overall, I don't know. This was just a game where they did not have the requisite pieces on defense, like I said. So you hope they get Denzel back next game. And then the injury to Cam Hart, I think looms pretty large over the secondary right now, which is not something I necessarily expected to say before the season with how much we maybe didn't expect him to play. But, he re-aggravates his ankle injury in that Saturday practice per Harbaugh. And now he's going to be out potentially for the foreseeable future in a walking boot. So that's obviously not something that you want to see. So that kind of leaves the secondary being Tarhib on the outside. I'd say Ja playing on the inside, and Eli Apple and Fulton. Fulton on the other side, and then Eli Apple kind of rotating in whenever he's necessary. So not exactly what I thought I would say about the secondary, 12 weeks in-ish, which I thought they have outperformed their expectations. But now, with the injuries, Fulton coming a little bit more back down to earth and where he's been for his career, tough night for him for sure. But, not the worst game defensively I've ever seen a team put up on tape, but we came into this game being like, all right, what's it going to look like when the Chargers play, a real offense? And I think it looked like this defense still, like the offense, has some ways to go. Shout out to special teams. I didn't really shout them out before, but you had J.K. land a punt, inside the 10. You had Dicker, making field goals. You had Darius Davis with a nice punt return. All of that is kind of for naught in that one, but I wanted to shout out what I thought was a pretty decent night from Ryan Ficken, all things considered, and his unit. So shout out to them. But yeah, I don't have many other takes on this game other than I think the Ravens were a better team. I think the Chargers are dealing with some injuries and personnel usage issues right now that I think have really prevented them, that can really prevent them from keeping up with some of these teams offensively outside of that Bengals game. So, particularly when you play a team that, was as stout and, disciplined as the Ravens were tonight, weren't getting too many of those freebie plays off. So when it's just, hey, can my guy beat your guy? The offense has a lot of work to do there, particularly now if JK is out for an extended period of time. Obviously, prayers to him. Hope he's okay. And then on defense, I think things will be better next week. I certainly expect them to rebound and be better, but they were just sort of between a rock and a hard place in this one. You can't put a bad tackling performance and play Derrick Henry at the same time. Obviously, get into some short yardage situations with him, and Derrick Henry converts those. What can you say? But yeah, I definitely didn't think this is the defensive game you necessarily wanted, but I can't say it's that far off from the defensive game I expected, given the personnel going into this one and sort of how I would just say how deprived it was a little bit of some of the real talent that they've had. So the injuries have definitely slowed down, some of the momentum I think they've built on this 4-game winning streak defensively, in addition to the rise in the level of competition. So that's about it for my thoughts today. I know that this is a very, very, very big week back in the States, where my home is. So happy Thanksgiving to all of you. Happy Thanksgiving to the Harbaughs, who, maybe have a little bit of an awkward family dinner after that game. Obviously not. But, if you guys are in the U.S. and are going home for the holidays, or you're already home for the holidays, say hi to your families, spend time with them, watch football. Actually, maybe don't watch football. It's going to be Giants and Cowboys before that night game with the Packers and Dolphins. So maybe take a break on the football. But, in general, thankful for all of you guys who have watched and supported my show and my work throughout the year. Thankful for all my family and friends who support me as well. This is a second or third year in a row I have not been able to go home for Thanksgiving, given my school schedule overseas. So a little bit of a tough time of the year for me there, but go celebrate a little bit extra for me at your Thanksgiving. Hope you guys have a tremendous holiday season as that starts to get into the swing of things. And, I'll be home eventually in like a month. But I hope that you guys have a tremendous holiday season. Bolt up. We'll bounce back against the Falcons next week. Not last week. Okay, this game broke my brain.